Hi, everybody. Welcome to Steel Rose's podcast. This podcast was created for women by women to elevate women's voices. Thank you so much for joining me today. You have Jenny with you. I am very excited to introduce our guest for today, Kerri McKenna Reece. Kerri is a trauma recovery coach in private practice, and she's an accredited instructor certifying other professionals on the impact of complex trauma. Kerri, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today.
Of course, it's my pleasure. So Kerri, I would love it if you provided the listeners with just your story and your background, and maybe how you got into trauma recovery coaching, and just, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I never in a million years saw myself in this field when I was young. I really felt different than everybody else, and I didn't really know who I was as an individual or how to connect with others. And I didn't feel connected to anyone, not my parents, my friends, or my family. And I feel connection really scared me, right? I wanted to fit in, but at the same time, I feared being rejected, and I didn't feel I was good enough, lovable or valuable or even worthy enough to be in the life of other people or to be happy. So I felt broken, incapable, stupid, ugly, and weak. And I really never felt like I fit in. So I didn't understand myself, my feelings, or my emotions. And they showed up in ways that failed me time and time again. And this validated my thoughts and feelings of inadequacy. So I pretty much felt flawed in all areas of my life. And that was all the result of my childhood. It was the way that I was treated, the way I was talked to, taken care of by my parents and other family members. Um, so really like growing up, I felt like my life was sort of pointless. And it wasn't always that way. As a toddler, I remember being very lively and creative. And I clearly remember wanting to be a dancer and a singer, and I wanted to shine, my little light on the world in such a glorious way. And I wanted to celebrate and share the love flowing from my soul with the world in a way that brought joy to myself and everyone around me. Um, we actually come into this world with this natural, innate feeling that we're going to be loved and nurtured. And our soul knows right from wrong. And we rely on our caregivers really to further define that for us. And we worship our parents and our caregivers and want nothing more than to connect and attach to them for guidance. And that's truly how we learn about relationships and we form our own identity. So that was the issue for me. I wasn't able to form my own identity because I wasn't nurtured. And our primary drive at birth is it's really to shape our personal identity. We're so full of love and trust. And when we're not taken care of and nurtured, we no longer feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, we're not able to connect or attach to our caregivers. And when we're not able to connect or attach, we're not able to form our own identity. So that's really how we define ourselves. It's through connection. It's establishing relationships with people. And it's by looking at the world through their eyes and our own eyes and the eyes of the other relationships we have. And trauma comes in and it disconnects that, right? It disconnects us and our inner relational bridges. Um, what we know today is we learn the most from birth to 8 years old. And that's our developmental years, and our brain, our personality, and our view of the world. They're developing at that time. And any trauma in this time frame, especially pervasive trauma, can have a drastic impact on a child's health and well-being way into their adulthood. And trauma for a child means like facing problems that are too big for them, having nobody there to give them tools or the support that they need. That was my childhood. It was beyond my resources to deal with. And I felt like I might get hurt or die, right? I felt abandoned and alone. And I suffered 13 years of childhood sexual abuse, and it was in my home and it was within my family. So I totally felt powerless. um, I was intensely frightened by that. It defiled my moral values. It violated my welfare. Um, I wasn't just sexually abused. I was emotionally, physically abused as well. Uh, so it totally changed the way that I walked in the world, right? I lost an aspect of myself. But it's not always just horror story stuff. It's it's really a child that does not feel safe. Maybe a child's in their home where their needs are met physically, where they have tremendous opportunities, but they don't feel safe sharing their emotions, or they just don't feel totally loved or accepted or respected. So they have to walk on eggshells, right? And they're full of insecurity, not able to fully relax. That's complex trauma as well. So it doesn't have to be physical or sexual abuse. It doesn't have to be severe neglect or abandonment. It could be a couple of key emotional needs that were not consistently met that cause the child to feel on guard. That does a lot of damage to a child. So, I really struggled not really having anyone to go to, not having, I had, two parents that were emotionally disconnected from me, with, dealing with their own trauma. They came into the marriage and having kids with their own trauma, and dealing with, trying to find safety for themselves. And it just kind of escalated from there. So it's a huge generational thing in our family. So it's really vital that children feel seen, heard, and valued by their parents and their caretakers and their nurture.
The part that I think one of the things that I think is very interesting, and when I was reflecting, when I was reading over everything in advance of our call today and preparing to have this discussion, highlighting for people that it's not just horror story stuff.
Yeah.
And speaking, like, I'm 40, so I look back and reflect on like my 40 years of life and things that I've been through, and like, why am I reacting the way that I'm reacting to things today? Like, why do I react this way? And I think that for our listeners, the one of the things I want you to take away from this conversation that we're going to have with Kerri today is you might notice some trauma traits in yourself. And it doesn't have to mean that you were physically or sexually abused, but maybe there was your emotional needs, as Kerri said, were not being met. I know me personally, like, I've reflected back on like my childhood and why I overcompensated in certain ways as an adult. And one of the things that I've said on other episodes that I know I see in myself, and I'm actually trying to course correct it now because I have children, is the need for me to be in control and to not ask for help. I don't need you. I got this. I can do it myself. And this has been something that has pretty much permeated my entire existence. Ever since I was a child, my mother will tell you, like, Jenny's independent. She's got it. Now, my parents saw it as oh, she's okay. We don't have to check on her. When in reality, I was really doing it because I felt like there wasn't room for me. And because I had an older brother and I had a little brother, my older brother constantly, they were like focused in on him. And one distinct memory, Kerri, I have, and this is a little bit silly, but it stuck with me. My dad used to help my older brother with his homework every single night. And they would sit at the table every single night together and do homework. And my older brother got that attention. Whereas nobody helped me with my homework. And I remember being like, oh, one night I was like, oh, let me just ask for help. And I asked for help. And the immediate reaction within minutes was like screaming at me, why don't you understand this? What's wrong with you? And I was like, never mind, I'm okay. I got it. I'm okay. And I never asked again. I was like, I am not going to ask for help, because the reaction that I get when I ask for help is frustration, anger, you name it. And I was like, you know what? I will just figure things out myself. And to this day, that has been something that I've been working on. So last year, when I started this journey of like, I'm going to be a better person and I'm going to really address some of my past trauma, that was one of the things that bubbled up, was like, Jenny, you have to ask for help. Like, you have to make this okay.
Yeah. Well, it's not really possible to heal alone, right? Because you don't really understand what the brain goes through. As children, our brain develops from the bottom up, right? And if you're constantly in a place where you don't feel safe, you get stuck in that limbic brain because there's nobody there to nurture you, to teach you how to go from your limbic brain, which is your emotional center,
Mm-hmm.
to your logic and reasoning brain, right? There's there's a right and left brain there. But not just that, trauma, I love that you pointed that out, really, because again, it's not all always horror story stuff. It could be one child that has an illness or that is a handful that takes up all the emotional energy of the parent, right? And they don't have any more space left to give to their other children.
Right.
Then it could also be children that come from wealthy families. If the parents are emotionally disconnected, then they're giving the kid money for everything, but they're not really talking to that child or nurturing that child. So they grow up, they may have money and they may look very successful, but really they're struggling emotionally because they haven't been in a space where they've been nurtured. Right. So you're right. It's not always horror story stuff.
What for, for things for people to reflect on, something I'd like to give the listeners almost like a, not a temp check, but I'd like to give them some insights around, like, you know, I guess markers for trauma, or things that might be seen as like a response to past traumas, like things of that nature, like might be helpful for the listeners to hear and recognize, and then maybe even like seek support or
Yeah.
do research.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like, that's what we call survival skills, right? What your brain does is your brain, it does exactly what it's designed to do. We all grow up feeling like we're broken when we're trauma survivors, but actually that's called resilience, right? Our brain gets us to this adult life the best way it can. And even though they work for us as children, they're very maladaptive as adults, right? Because what we're doing is, some of those survival skills are, we stuff our emotions, right? Maybe we're people pleasers. Maybe we have this great fear of being hurt, right? Or maybe we're addicted to chaos or adrenaline because we grew up in such a toxic home. That's the only thing we know how to handle. We don't know how to handle calmness, right? Maybe we want instant gratification, right? Because, there's been times when I was younger that my parent would say, "Hey, you want to go get some ice cream after dinner, or do you want to go now?" Well, I wanted to go right now because I knew after dinner they may not be in that emotional headspace. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to get my ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
So as an adult, you see something, you're like, "Wow, I got to have it now," right? It's instant gratification. Maybe they have a fear of failure, or maybe they feel like a phony, right? Maybe I used to be a software test engineer for the government, uh, before I went into private practice, and I felt like a phony every single day, even though I knew exactly what I was doing. I felt like a fraud, right? Maybe they fear the unknown. A lot of people are so afraid to move forward with healing because they fear what they don't know, and it's easier to live using these survival skills than it is to touch deeply on the way that they're actually feeling. Maybe they have a long list of projects to do around their house. There's probably 10 or 12 things that are started that are never finished, right? Trauma survivors tend to be really good starters. They get really excited, but they're really poor finishers. Um, Maybe they have a deep longing for validation, or a poor sense of personal value with a fear of losing that value. Sometimes fitness is a big one. People get in the gym and they think, "Oh, I'll look my best and be my best." It's that whole perfect mentality thing. But then you get older and your body changes and your hormones aren't the same and it's hard to keep up, or maybe it just becomes exhausting, right? And all of a sudden they fall into this deep depression because they feel like they've lost their value, right? So image is a big thing with that. Um, Even smart, even people that throw themselves into education, right? If all of a sudden something they've tackled uh, is more than they can handle, then it'll automatically make them feel like they're this total failure. So image is very important to trauma survivors. Maybe they find it hard to trust. Control is a big issue. A lot of trauma survivors are very controlling. And the reason for that is because they know that if they have control of it, they're not going to get hurt. Right.
I'm laughing because this is basically like you're describing me. It's like, that's why I'm laughing.
Yeah. If they control it all, they won't get hurt. And if they are stuffing emotions, or they're stuffing feelings, or they're showing up as a chameleon, no one will see that. Right. Because what happens is when we're born and we have that great love for ourselves that we want to share with the world, if our environment or someone around our environment or somebody tells us in their own way that we're not good enough, we self abandon ourselves. immediately we're wrapped in this profound guilt, right? Because we've abandoned what's the most passionate about us, which is our own self, right? Our intuition is derailed. And then what happens is the anxiety sets in because we're showing up as a chameleon in every relationship. Who do I need to be so Jenny likes me? So Jenny
Mhm.
respects me or I fit in, right? So then at the end of those interactions, you're like, oh, did Jenny like me? Was I pretty enough? Was I good enough? Right. And then it leads to toxic shame because you find yourself doing what you think Jenny wants you to do, being who Jenny thinks you need to be, and you fall into doing things that really go against your authentic self,
Mhm.
right? So it's such a battle because you've got this guilt, you've got this new trauma identity that you've taken on to try to fit in the world because you're scared to be yourself, right? And then you have the anxiety of it all and then the toxic shame. So it's like it's a major battle.
I used to struggle quite a bit with people pleasing and codependency, like pretty badly, up until I was about 26. It
Yeah.
was it was pretty intense, and at when I turned 26, I had started down the path of realizing how much I love like self-help books and like
Mhm.
reading up on things, and I actually got very into reading books about, the brain and psychology and psychiatry and like how this all interconnects and how your actions and emotions and how everything's connected. And when I was 26 is when I started the journey of using my feelings to determine how the situation was, because a lot, and I know women probably more in particular than men, but I think it's across the board.
Yeah.
Like you said, we stuff our feelings. I was picking up on that phrase that we stuff our feelings, and you'll just do something because you feel obligated, you don't want to disappoint people, but then you walk away from the experience and you're frustrated and upset and you're angry, and you take that feeling, that bad feeling there, and you carry that with you
Yeah.
to the next thing and the next day and the next day, and it kind of just continues to compound and pile up on you, and then you're leading a life that you really don't want to be leading. And I had noticed that I picked up on it when I was about 26. I started cutting some toxicity out of my life. I started really honing in on, like, I really only want to have like people that actually are interested in my well-being
Yeah.
around me, because I think that's a big thing too, right? Like surrounding yourself with people that are supporting you being the best version of yourself that you could be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, what you just talked about reminds me of like, and I don't have anything against Mary Kay when I say this. So for the people that are listening, please understand that. But it kind of reminds you of the Mary Kay lady that knocks on your front door and she's your good friend. And you're like, you come in, Jenny's like, oh, listen, I'm selling Mary Kay and I would love for you to have a party for me. And I'm like, oh, of course. I have to have a party for Jenny because Jenny's my friend and she won't like me if I tell her no.
Yeah.
But then Jenny leaves and I'm like, oh my God, I hate Jenny so much now. I never want to see her again. And you gain this huge resentment, and it comes from the fact that you haven't honored yourself. You
Yeah.
haven't said, you know what, Jenny, I love it that you're selling Mary Kay and you're passionate about this, but it's not my thing, and I wouldn't be comfortable having a party. However, if I hear of anybody that wants some Mary Kay, I'll send them your way. Right. But that's what happens across the board. We end up being yes people.
Yeah.
We say yes because we're trying to find that love and acceptance we didn't get when we were born from our own environment. We want love, acceptance, respect, right? There's nothing worse than feeling like you're not accepted by your own tribe, which is your family,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then you tend to be like a really needy person in relationships. You have a very negative and critical mindset of yourself because now your family, your environment has told you you're not good enough, right?
Mhm.
So you've learned I'm not good enough. I'm to blame for all of my problems. I should be ashamed of myself. And I'm powerless really because I'm a little kid. That's what you've learned in your family, and you bring that up into your adult life,
Yeah.
right? You have this very negative mindset of yourself. You're jealous of people that feel like they have it all together because you're constantly, why can't I get this? Why am I not good enough? Right.
Mhm.
And with a constant fear of being abandoned, because there it is. If Jenny doesn't like me, that's an abandonment. So now I've not just been abandoned by my family, I've been abandoned by Jenny too. Right. So you're needy and then you feel being abandoned. So you take on a helper role as well. Let me do that for you.
Yes.
Let me do it. I'll do it.
I'll do it.
never say no, right? But you're
No
also
boundaries. Not setting any boundaries for yourself. Yeah.
not, well, listen, if you don't not given boundaries as a kid, you don't know how to set them as adult. If
Mm-hmm.
you are not properly loved as a child, you don't know how to love yourself as an adult,
Right.
right? If you're not respected as a child, you don't know how to demand respect as an adult. And if you don't feel, if your parents don't make you feel like you're worth more than anything in this world, you don't understand what your worth is as an adult. You learn that in your childhood, right? When babies come into this world, it should be this huge celebration, not a bunch of doctors poking and prodding. There should be good music playing. There should be a huge celebration. It's a new life,
Yeah.
right? Babies come out of the womb now, they're terrified, like, oh my God, you know,
Poor things.
you know what I mean? Don't you don't even have to spank a baby, they'll just cry,
They
you
just
know?
cry. Mhm.
Right. So it's like it should be such a glorious thing, right? But because it's not, we're not giving that baby respect right away when it comes into the world, right?
It's interesting that you say that because when my kids were babies, it was incredibly important to me. This is going to sound it might be strange for the listeners. And I don't know why this was so important to me, but you just said respect for babies. And I was pretty particular about my kids, not in like an over ridiculous way, but
Yeah.
something I was really particular about was my kids, even as infants, not having clothes on. I really was not interested in, like, people do like the little naked baby pictures and this and that. I was very like, I don't like that. This is my child. I have to protect this child.
Yeah,
And even with
absolutely.
like changing the baby's diapers in settings where like family was around and stuff, I always I was very particular. Like, no, these are their private parts. I will change them, or my husband or whatever, like, but put them in a place where they're not totally exposed and people are staring at them. Even for like bath time, I was very and I didn't come from, I do want to like kind of reorient from the listeners. I wasn't physically abused as a child or sexually abused, but this was something I was very particular about because
Yeah.
to me, I'm like, this is a person here. They should be protected. And even like when they were little and taking baths and stuff like that, I never let them run around naked. I always put clothes on them because to me, at least the bottoms, the tops, when they were little, it was different. But I always made it a point, like, we need to cover you up. You protect yourself. And my husband would always tell them, even when they were little, he'd be like, this is yours. This is valuable. Protect yourself. And we would always, and that's how we brought them up. And
Right.
it's a point of sensitivity for me because would observe other people with their kids and they'd be naked running at the water park and I'm always like, but what are we telling them? Like,
Yeah.
what are we telling them that this isn't, and I know that seems silly because they're so little,
Yeah.
but
It does
that was
not seem
important.
silly. No, it doesn't seem silly at all. I'm hypersensitive to parents making their kids sit on Santa Claus's lap.
Yeah.
Because the first thing you're doing is that child's crying and saying, listen, I don't want to do this. And when you force the kid to do it, you're saying your boundaries don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And because that picture's not really for the kid, it's for the parent.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing with the Easter Bunny, but it's also the same thing with grandparents. Like when my daughter was little, if she said, I don't want to kiss Papa because for any reason, whatever the reason is, she didn't even have to give me a reason. I don't want to kiss him. Then you don't have to. If you
Right.
don't want to hug him and you don't want to kiss him, you don't have to. Because when I was younger, I was forced to hug and kiss somebody that was abusing me.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you should. That's family. You have to do that.
You have to do it. It's family,
Right.
right?
Your children are telling you what their boundaries are in their own language. And for a baby, all that is tears. Like it's even when you're feeding your baby, they tell you in your own way when they're done eating.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to understand that. And you're teaching children that their boundaries are very important. And if you're forcing them to eat food when they say I'm full,
yeah,
you're telling them their boundaries don't matter.
We used to, even for like relatives that our kids didn't see a lot, we didn't make them. And my husband was totally like, I was very happy that he was very on board with like all these markers that he and I were like, no, we're not cool with this. If they didn't see somebody for a long time, like we weren't like, oh, you have go, you have to kiss them. Exactly what you just said. Cause I'm like, they don't know this person. They're scared. Like they're little. They need a minute. Like, and then once they warmed up, okay, that's fine. But then in that moment, I'm like, yeah, I'm telling my child that your fear doesn't matter. Suck it up and what is the frame? Stuff your feelings. Like, I'm not going to tell my kids to stuff their feelings. Like, no, I'm recognizing you. I see you. I'm here for you. I'm your backup. You don't want to hug them. You don't have to. The other thing that you touched on, and actually we also do this at home, when the kids say they're full. Now, when I was growing up, and Kerri, I think probably you too, you had to finish your food. Like, you had to finish your plate of food. You were not to waste. And I didn't do that with my kids, and my husband didn't do that. And we actually did it. One, we wanted to make sure they understood their boundaries, but we say to them, is your belly full? Because then sometimes they go, well, I want a snack instead. We're like, no. Well, then your belly's not full. Like, eat a little bit more dinner. But because it's an emotional thing, but it's also a physical thing too. Because if we're telling them to ignore their fullness cues when they're little, well, then they will be, and I know I read this somewhere, they could be more prone to overeating when they get older because we're telling them to ignore that cue.
Yeah. I love this topic so much because the whole thing about your children is you have to cultivate their innate wisdom. Okay. That's what they have. And their compass, their internal compass, right? Their intuition, it's there. And you're teaching them how to tap into that. So a lot of trauma survivors, they walk into relationships or groups of people asking themselves, what if they don't like me? It has nothing to do with whether or not they like you. It's, do you like them? If you don't like the way the situation feels, right? If you don't like a person's presence, that's your soul speaking to you. That is your internal wisdom that says, hold up, Jenny. This is not a good place for you. Pay attention, right? That's your internal compass. And so by teaching your children to focus on their belly and say, hey, are you full? Are you hungry? Do you want any more food? Because absolutely, if a kid's going to say, hey, I'll take some cake. Well, listen, if you got room for cake, you got room for the rest of the pasta on your plate, right? You can have cake later as a treat, right? But I think that's fantastic that you're doing that, because the whole thing with trauma survivors is we're so used to dismissing the way we feel and disregarding ourselves to honor other people. You should never honor someone else first. That's like when you're on an airplane and they say, put your oxygen mask on first, because if you're not healthy, you can't help the person next to you. It's the same way in life, right? You need to make sure that you're healthy. So listen, if I'm around somebody and that person doesn't make me feel good, I need to honor my gut and say, hey, thank you for telling me that, right? You have this internal wisdom about you that you're born with. Your parents just have to help you cultivate that. And you're doing fantastic like that with your kids.
So I will say this, the reason why we're so sensitive to it is because we did not have that.
Yeah.
So we're very particular.
I feel that.
It's the only, there's so many things, and it's exhausting. The way that we're parenting our kids, we talk about it at the end of the day all the time. We're like, we are emotionally drained. We're exhausted. We're like tapped out at the end of the day, because so much of what we do is we talk to them, and we're constantly talking to them. And even like when, we have to yell at them for being on the computer or whatever, if they're playing the video games too much and they're getting into fights, like, we do all that stuff too. We do all that stuff. But we just try to, like, even after they all get in trouble, my husband will make it a point to like be like, come here, I want to talk to you. And once the feelings have settled down, we're like, hey, listen, this is what happened. One thing I do want to kind of really like hone in on for the listeners is really gut checking yourself. I think for so many of us for so long, we have ignored our intuition, and you ignore that little voice or that gut feeling or that feeling in your heart, whatever you want to call it. You almost become conditioned to ignore it after a long period of time. And
where you self-abandon. It's called
self-abandonment. And I remember when I first started to check back in with myself, it was right when I met my husband, and I had started to break the cycles of codependency with my friends and my family. I had started to break those codependency cycles. Nobody was happy with me. Everybody was up in arms. and they were all coming together on the side without me and talking about how I wasn't being me, quote unquote. And I remember saying to them, like, I am finally being me. You're just mad because now I'm not being the me you wanted me to be.
That's right.
And there was a lot of like strife for a very long time, for a couple of years, where my family was mad at me because I had significantly pulled out of the I'm here to help you. I'm your go-to. You can count on me for
That's
anything.
right.
And I started prioritizing my own feelings and emotions. And I used to check in with myself because they would come at me with like, you're too into your new relationship. This is when I met my husband.
Yeah.
He's monopolizing your time. I'm like, well, he's not chaining me to the door. Like, I'm selecting to spend my time with him because at the time when I was 26, like all my friends had been married at that point. Everybody was having kids. I was like one of the last single ones left, but because I had paid so much attention to everybody else's lives, I wasn't really living my own. And
Yeah.
I used to gut check myself like almost weekly and be like, all right, let's do a barometer check here. In this moment, am I waking up happy? Do I feel good? Do I feel okay with this? Because at the end of the day, like all that's really mattering here is, do I feel okay? And
That's right.
every time it came back, yes, Jenny, you're on the right path here. This is the life that you're trying to cultivate for yourself. Do it. Keep going forward. And people weren't happy. I lost a lot of friends. Well,
Yeah.
quote unquote friends. Like, I lost a lot of people in my life. And to be honest with you, I call it like trimming the fat. Like, these were people that I really didn't need to be friends with and I shouldn't have been connected to anymore. And, our time for our friendship had come and gone. And I was moving on to a different phase of my life. And it just sort of happened that way. And the reason why I want to share all that with the listeners is because it is a hard road, but it's also a beautiful road. Because once you start to really recognize that some changes are needed, you'll start to feel like the unease. People around you will feel the unease. But if you could just get past that part, and Kerri, I'm sure you could have more, you have more insight there. But for me, it was like, I just need to get over that hump. I have to know, like, on the other side of this hill, like, all right, I still feel okay. I'm still happy with what I'm doing. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. Um, Everybody that suffers trauma has a little bit of narcissism in them. Sometimes it's a whole lot though, because again, we're trying to feel safe when we're growing up. But when we get older, sometimes we're narcissistic or we're gaslighters to the extreme and we end up hurting other people. And that's where that comes into play. And then when you say, they're used to having control over you, your mind and your actions and manipulating what you do, making you live by the family rules or whatever those rules may be or mythologies. But then what happens is you come into your own,
Mhm.
right? And it makes them angry because see now what they're used as survival skills, they're not able to use with you anymore. They're not able to manipulate that situation and have control. So now they have this fear of being hurt, right? Or
Mhm.
being seen authentically when they're trying to stuff their emotion. The same thing happened with me. I was taken to court because I wouldn't do what I was told, right? So that's very common. You lose a lot of friends and a lot of family members. And if you have a narcissist in your family, they will go to the extreme, like taking you to court. Sometimes it's a narcissistic gaslighter, which is even worse, right? Because they have an inflated sense of themselves and they're always placing the blame on you. So that's a really hard dynamic right there, especially if it's a parent. But I often tell people that, and I'll say this to you because a lot of trauma survivors, they live in that fear. They're too afraid to move forward. But if you step back and you start listening to yourself, it's quite possible that you're the healthiest member of your whole family, right? You
Right.
get labeled the black sheep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You get labeled the black sheep. But the thing is, that's because you've seen the unhealthy and that's not working for you anymore.
Mhm.
And you see how that's not going to benefit you moving forward. You want something different for you. And when you step back and you say, I will no longer live on your terms, it's going to be on my terms now, right? I'm not going to continue to self abandon me. They don't like that because then they don't have control, right?
Mhm.
you're taking away their power. So congratulations, you're the healthiest member of your family.
You'll probably be very mad at me.
Maybe me and you got the good genes.
We did. That's fine. That works that way. The other thing that I think too is important to say, like I also have over the years tried to like address some of this and not like educate, but kind of like in a way, because I have a respect for my elders, like my parents. Obviously, you know, I have a respect for them. They're my parents, and they did what they could with the skills that they had. That's sort of how I look at it. Like they raised me to the best of their ability with the skill set that they had. There were things that could have been communicated a lot better. Yes, for sure. But what I lived and what I went through like has brought me to today being able to now be able to communicate to my kids better. So that's sort of how, to me, like that's how I explain this whole process. I'm like, yes, I went through what I went through, but you know what? Now I have these skills and I can teach this to my children. I do remember a few instances when I was growing up where there was one in particular. This came to me like after years of like, you know, self-reflection, because I was trying to figure out why I had this mentality of being a doormat, for lack of a better term. Like, why do I have this mentality? Like, why did I feel like for so long in my life, why did I feel like it was okay for people to treat me like crap and take advantage of me? And I knew it. And I knew I was being, you know, emotionally abused or whatever by these people. But I would always kind of come around and like make it okay and be like, well, they had a tough day, you know, or, oh, they're just stressed out. They don't really mean it. And I actually was able to pinpoint it back. Kerri, this is like wild, because I went through so much trying to remember like how this happened. There was a conversation when I was little. I was in grammar school, and my older brother had been just horrible to me, mean to me, just very mean, making fun of me. I was overweight as a child. So he was making fun of me for my weight, for just everything, just really going at it with me. And I remember I was crying the one night and I was telling my mommy, I was like, oh, you know, I don't understand. Like, he's so mean to me. I don't understand why he's so mean to me. And she directed me and said, sometimes you have to turn the other cheek, and he's having a tough time. So just understand that sometimes people are mean to you, but you have to understand that they're going through something and just, it's okay. And I was like, all right. And in my head, that translated to, I have to accept this behavior because it's okay. And I would rationalize it. And it actually brought me into really bad relationships. I haven't had a ton of relationships, but the ones that I had before my husband were horrible. And I didn't understand for so long, like, where did that come from? And it's crazy because it was like one pivotal moment, one message that stuck with me, and it got in there, and I just carried it with me all the way into my 20s.
Yeah. This is another thing. When we're young like that, if you look at the way that you were treated, right? This is what we call putting the puzzle pieces together. It was you've identified that puzzle piece, that moment with your mom. But if your mom had said, you know what, Jenny, it's okay for you to honor yourself and say, listen, I understand you may be having a bad day, but the way you're treating me is not right. So I'm going to remove myself from the room. And when you decide you want to treat me better, we can have this conversation again. Right. That would have landed so differently with you. If my mother had said to me, listen, if my mother, instead of shaming me, if my mother has said, listen, the person that sexually abused you is a really bad person. You didn't do anything wrong. And she would have put a stop to the abuse. Man, my whole life would have been different. It would have landed different. Right. But she taught you with the skill she had. And this goes back to children, trauma survivors. We walk around and we feel like we're broken people. We're not broken people. Our reactions are normal reactions to abnormal situations. Okay. I was a kid that was abused in a home. And when I went to school and I didn't know what to do with the way that I was feeling because I wasn't being nurtured, I was further disciplined and shamed by teachers who didn't understand what was going on at home. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like I always say, there's no such thing as a bad kid. It's a bad environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because like if you ever go on it, for the listeners too, like if you ever really take time and really start self-reflecting and just kind of thinking, it's not to now, it's not to say live in the past, because we can learn from it, but you have to learn from it and let it go, which I have. Like, it took, I'm saying, many, many years of like therapy and working on it. But there's a matter of like, there's a part of you that needs to recognize and pay respect to and pay homage to, you know what, I did go through this, but this is where I'm at now. And this is how I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to turn around. That's why I keep referring to how we're working with our kids, because my husband and I both went through very traumatic things when we were growing up, and we have taken it and turned it. And Kerri, I want to like highlight for what you do, because you coach people through this. Like, this is, you have a private practice and you work with people through their trauma. And it's incredible that you've taken something that was really horrible and you've turned it into something where you're helping people. Like, I mean, kudos, congratulations. Like, I can't even say enough.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate you saying that. It's making meaning. That's what we do, right? What you've done is you identified this situation in your past, and at one time you felt it meant one thing, but now as an adult you look at it and you go, wow, really, I am allowed to honor myself. So you make a different meaning of it. Like our brains, that's what I was saying about kids, our brains need to make meaning of something, right? And so when you're little, you don't have any skills if you're not being nurtured, so automatically you turn that around on yourself. It's my fault. But
Mhm.
now here you are as an adult and you start thinking back to, oh, this situation, like the situation you share with your mom, right? Then you understand, wait a minute, I am allowed to honor myself, right? So you make a new meaning of it. You start really understanding yourself and you start coming into your own. And that's what I teach people to do, right? We do look at the past, but it's not about what you've suffered. It's about the pain you're carrying right now,
Yeah.
right? Because you still have it and it's 30 some years later. And it's not that it's your fault. It's just that you didn't make the meaning of it that made sense, right?
Right.
You're still blaming yourself now, and it caused you to have a negative mindset. It's causing you to live in these with these coping skills, right?
Hmm.
And trying to survive every day versus giving yourself permission to honor you and standing up and saying, wait a minute, this is not okay. And it's also about understanding you're allowed to make mistakes. Jenny, I have not always gotten it right. I've had to go back to relationships and say, you know what, Jenny, I said that I was going to sell your Mary Kay, but now that I think about it, I'm not really comfortable doing that. This just doesn't seem like my thing. Um, it's okay to do that, right?
Yeah.
But we're so used to honoring other people and worried about what if they don't accept me, that we never think about ourselves and the way we feel and what our needs are, right? We keep self-abandoning over and over and over again because
Hmm.
it's what we were taught to do, right?
It is incredibly interesting, because even like there are so many, again, because I've worked on this for so long and I'll continue to work on it for the rest of my life, but there's so many moments where I can be like, oh, I do this because of this when I was 16, and I'm like, and I can kind of
Yeah.
track it back. And I even like had come to the revelation, I think when you and I were having our intro call, or it might have been before it, where um my like almost my entire reaction to
Mhm.
how I wanted to show up in my marriage was a reaction to how my parents were. And the
Yeah.
whole, like, everything that I was like, well, I want to be a breadwinner, I want to have a career, I need to be the money maker. That was literally all a reaction, because I
Yeah.
don't really need to do any of that stuff. And it's crazy. And it's so important too, that like, to recognize it, to honor it. Well, then how can I turn this into something better? What can I do better for my children here? And if you don't have children, what can you do better for yourself in this moment to change how you're processing information? And I'll bring it up again that Kerri does do coaching, and she does have her own private practice, because this is really crucial. And I want to really highlight that, because I think people get a little weird with coaching. Like, they're like, oh, that's
Mhm.
strange. Like, I don't know if I'd be comfortable with it. It's so empowering, because I do some coaching with folks, and like I have people coach me, and I do like podcast accountability stuff. Like, there's other like avenues, and it brings so much more light to you when you have someone that's showing up for you to help you and to inspire you and to help guide you a little bit, because we do need that.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for bringing that topic up because, I've studied psychology and I was first going to get a PhD and I was going to go that route. But what really has my love of coaching is the fact that there's no ethical guidelines that tell me I'm not allowed to relate to that person,
Mhm.
right? If Jenny shows up in my chair and she's been sexually abused, I can help her put words to feelings and emotions that she doesn't understand because I've walked that walk, right? And I can say to her, listen, I've totally been there and we can share experiences and we can talk about those things. And if I had went the path and gone to medical school and gotten a PhD, those ethical guidelines would have prevented me from being able to relate. So
So,
that's the difference between Western medicine and what coaching does, right? And coaching has this phenomenal dynamic of helping you not only learn about yourself, but learn how to relate to other people. Right. And that's what's fantastic. I built what I teach others about, I built according to what I needed as a kid.
mhm.
Right. What I needed when I was going through that, I needed to feel like I was seen, heard, and valued. I needed to feel like I was loved and that somebody cared about me. And then I wouldn't have tried to commit suicide at 15 years old, right? I wouldn't have made all these poor decisions. I felt like I was thrown to the wolves and told to raise myself. And then as I was trying to find my way, living in fear, and I made all these mistakes, I was criticized for everything I did.
Right.
Well, listen, you're my parent. If I'm not supposed to be doing this, why didn't you nurture
Why
me
didn't
so
you talk? Yeah, like, why didn't you talk to me about
like
this? Like, why didn't I know? That was
you
another
don't
big
have
one.
a
Yeah.
right. Right. It's like you don't have a right to sit back and criticize me when you fail to do your job.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like that's the one thing I love about my work is everybody that I'm surrounded with. Again, it's not always horror story stuff, but it's the way that they've been affected deeply by their childhood and they've moved forward in a way that's not healthy for them. They survived it. It's wonderful that they've survived it. That shows you have tremendous resilience. And I want to stress really hard on here that there's not a broken trauma survivor out there. Your brain is a phenomenal thing. It got you here. You've
Mhm.
survived. Okay. It's not healthy today, the skills that you're using, but man, they worked for you great back then. Let's turn around and see what you want for you today, what you need for you today to move forward and be healthy, right? Let's look at the past and decide, okay, I don't like that. It's like looking at past relationships. This guy hit me. The next guy's not going to do that. You know what I mean? It's you look at the way you're treated and you learn from that and you move forward, but it's about honoring you.
Yeah.
Coming home to you is what I like to say.
I like that a lot. And I like that you highlighted that, like, yes, like, these skills got you here. They were your survival skills. That's how you got through this. But now let's recognize that you do not need to use those survival skills anymore.
Right. And
You can do it differently.
well, exactly. And let me say this too. Those survival skills, that was resilience. You have no accountability for that, in my opinion, right? When you're young and you're trying to survive and you don't have anybody directing your way and you're just a kid and you're living in fear, that your parents or your caregivers are accountable for that. The only thing you're accountable for is how you move forward,
Mhm.
right? And you do that by honoring yourself, right? If that's what you want to do, if you want to heal and move forward. But I praise people. Listen, they come to my practice and I'm worthless. I don't do nothing. You got you here. You did a tremendous job to sit in this chair right here. How do you want to move forward to build your happiness? Right? Because you're not accountable for any of that. It makes no difference what you did, whether you were a dancer, you sold drugs, you went to prison. You're not accountable for that. What you're accountable for is how you move forward from
Yeah.
today.
Like, from today forward, how are you showing up? You've made this decision. You've made the decision to seek out coaching support. How are we going to go from here? Yes, that happened, but you can do something totally different. You can
That's
change the
right.
course. I'm a big, big believer in being able to shift the course of your life. I don't think that people are just stuck. I think mentally we are told, like, a particular story and that, like, oh, you get to a certain age, like, that's it. Can't move on from here. This is your lot in life. That is so untrue. And we have to stop selling that story. There's so much more that you can do. Now, Kerri, do you also work with people virtually or is it in person?
I do. I run groups, and most of the time I do them virtually. I don't take anybody in my office.
Okay.
I work out of my home, so it's all done virtually.
Okay. That's
And I
very
have people
cool.
all
That's
over
very
the
cool.
world. What's that?
Sorry, say that again.
I said I have clients all over the world. I have clients in Australia,
Oh, that's
some in
amazing.
Canada, some they're all over the United States as well. I got one from China. So yeah, anywhere I can work. I do it internationally.
Kerri, if somebody wanted to reach out to you for support after hearing this episode, what is, do you have a website that you'd like?
Yeah, it's Kerri Coaching, and that's KERRI coaching.com. Or they could reach out by email, coach@kerricoaching.com.
Okay. And I'll be sure, listeners, to link Kerri's information in the description of the podcast. So you can click on it after you listen. She's phenomenal, as you can hear. I'm like almost sad to see this recording happen just because I'm like, like, you're so insightful. And it's just so lovely to speak to you because you've taken something that could have been, life ending, and you've turned it into something totally different. And it's so amazing because it is unique to you and your story. And it's just wonderful. So just a huge kudos. I'm so impressed and just so inspired by you.
Thank you. I just want to leave everybody with, listen, when you love yourself, you find yourself. So give yourself permission every single morning. Look in the mirror and give yourself permission to honor you, to put you first. That's not selfish, and there's no shame in that. And the world may say different, but honestly, if you're not healthy, you can't be healthy for anyone else, right? So love you, right? Give yourself permission to honor you.
Thank you so much for that, Kerri. And listeners, I hope that you found this episode insightful, inspiring, and you can reach out to Kerri for support should you feel like you want to go down that journey. I highly recommend going down that journey. I really do. We'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.